Well, thank you, all of you who are joining us today. My name is Anita Gonzalez, and I'm a teaching consultant in the Center for Educational Innovation. Our big important topic today is to think about, although this isn't digital studio.
If I have the, sorry, my bad. I have too many slides to open email.
Our topic today is how can we teach in those more challenging situations that aren't so easy to translate to online learning. And this focus today, if you could, there we go, if we could share the screen. The focus today is tactile studio experience. So we're thinking about things like sculpture and painting and drawing and things that are perhaps really challenging, like ceramics, because of the need for equipment. So just a few things about how we can communicate today. We have a chat panel and we have a chat monitor. So you're welcome to pose questions or even pop some resources or ideas into the chat, and we'll pop back and forth and visualize the chat. You also can unmute and just speak. There's usually a little bit of a, it takes a second to unmute, so I'll try to pause long enough. And I do want to let you know that this session is being recorded. We're going to record it so that we can very accurately document whatever good ideas come out of today's session. And then also the recording will be available. So we hope to get that up in about a week so that people can look at it who weren't able to join us today. Or you can look at it yourself. Can we see the next slide?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. I feel like I'm in an art history class. I don't know if any of you ever took an art history class where the teaching assistant was terrorized by the, by the faculty member telling them to do the next slide. And then those old slide projectors broke and slides got stuck. Some of you know what I'm talking about from that analog age. Anyway, just want to talk about why we're doing these discussions, a little bit of introduction of who's here, and then we'll get right to who our speakers are. And so we'll hear from our speakers first, and then we'll open it up for discussion. So our provost asked our center to convene discussions so that we could share experiences, but that we could also identify supports that are needed. So we definitely want to hear today what might help you going forward. And our notes will be shared with you, but also with the provost regents and to create those resources I mentioned. So I'm your facilitator today, Anita Gonzalez. Mary, who's handling the slides, thank you, Mary, is our chat monitor. We have an academic technologist, Lauren Marsh. If she's not here right now, she'll be here shortly to help answer questions or at least share your ideas with the academic technologists units.
And I see, Anita, I'm just going to jump in quick here too. I also see that we have Chris Lopez from Lattice joining, who's also an academic technologist. So
great. Thank you for joining us, Chris. Another fantastic resource. Our panelists today, I don't know if Neil is here. Neil here. Jason Ramey from Morris Studio Art and James Boyd Brent from Design, and maybe we'll have Abby informally jump in if Neil can't join us. We also have an observer from CEI, J.D. Walker. He's just taking notes, and he'll also be sending you a survey just to ask for some feedback. And then Alyssa Bonac is also from CEI, and she's taking notes today as well. Just so you know who's here, who's lurking. So maybe we should start with Jason Ramey. Each of the panelists had some pre-questions that they could respond to or not. So they're going to share what their initial thoughts are. So we'll start with Jason.
Hi, hello everyone. Joining you here from Morris. I think I'm the only person in the building today. Had to come in and use the internet here because my partner is in meetings on our home internet, which doesn't work that well. So I think I'm the only person here. So what are the so some of the questions we got in the email? So can everyone hear me, by the way?
Yep.
Okay. Good. So So some of the questions posed in the email, one of them was, what are the easiest things to do in your studio course? And I'll address. So right now I'm teaching what we call visual studies for non-majors, sculpture, and then what we call here 3D foundations, which would be the prereq to sculpture. We're calling it Studio Essentials, Materials, and Space right now. And I'll kind of address those two since those are the primary studio courses I'm teaching right now. I'm also teaching a senior thesis because someone's on sabbatical, and that poses its own problems as far as shows and you know, a final exhibition that was supposed to happen a few days ago. So that poses some of the same problems, and I'll talk about those problems here in a minute. But some of the easiest things, I mean, continuing. I think most of you who teach, you know, if you're teaching art, maybe you start. I've been starting every project with the PowerPoint for years now. I'm still able to do that. So that is one of the things that I'm still able to do. And I feel that the students are still getting some of a lot of the same information there that is shared with them as a PDF and Canvas or in a Google Drive, which seems to be problematic. But I still feel like they're seeing the artists they should see. We talked about contemporary artists who are working in the same way with the same materials they're going to be working with. I feel like that is one of the things that we can continue to do that is working. Now, whether or not they're looking at that or, you know, looking at these artists, I'm not sure of that yet. But I also, one of the things too, and this is just something I do in all of my courses, I show them past work that has been made with this project, and I sort of go over the piece with them and say, here's what I was looking at in this piece. And I may, you know, I don't say the names of the former students, and they're usually from years past, 5 or 6 years ago. But I talk to them about what was working in this piece and what wasn't working. And so now what I'm doing is sharing those images and writing. I used to be able to do it in person, but I'm writing just here's what worked with this piece, and here's what I was looking at, and here's what the student could have done better. So that's a real important thing for me starting out with the younger students. They need to know what, you know, even though I have a rubric, they need to know what I'm looking for. And they really appreciate me showing past work. So I'm still doing that. But I guess some of we were in the middle, particularly for my courses, we were in the middle of transitioning to a modified book project. So luckily, a few days before we shut down, we work with the library here in Morris, and we grab old books that they're throwing out, and they each grab about 4 to 7 books. So we were able to get some supplies home with them. And obviously they're not working on a bandsaw or with the CNC machine at this point, but they were told to approach this in an analog manner, and we were able to prepare this. We had a few days. We kind of thought things were going to happen, and we have a few days to get these books home with them. So that seems to be working well, and the projects have been turned in, and they are working well. And another thing I'm doing right now in sculpture is we in the spring semester we do nothing but cast bronze and aluminum in the sculpture course. So luckily we were able to send some of you sculpture folks will know we were able to send Victory Brown wax home with them, just a certain amount, and we work that hot and cold, so they're able to work cold at home, which means sometimes they're just putting it in the freezer and working it with a butter knife. And then what's going to happen here in a few weeks is they will send these pieces back, and this is one of the challenges, I guess. You know, one of the I'm kind of skipping around here, but we have a challenge when it comes to sort of shipping this work back, right? I mean, it's Victory Brown wax. It will make it through the mail without melting, but what is our cost, and what are our student fees? Do we still have student fees to be able to ship 12 packages back to Morris campus? And then once I cast it in bronze with a skeleton crew here, do I send that 7-pound piece through the mail so the student gets a piece of work at the end? So if that's something to get started. Not sure if anyone else wants to chime in, or do I keep sort of moving?
You know, you can keep moving. We'll
Okay.
monitor the chat, and when everyone's talked, we can just kind of have an open forum.
Okay, sure. So So the hardest things, I mean, obviously the technical assistance with, especially with the beginning students, you're at a, it's a crucial time. You know, you have a lot of opportunity in a studio course, a 3-hour studio course, 2-hour and 45-minute studio course to really work with them hands-on. Especially, you know, here at Morris we have smaller classes, and a lot of that time is hands-on and technical assistance, which you know will be crucial for them in the upper division, upper level courses. And that's been one of the most difficult things now. I can look at a piece when they share this online, or I can have a Zoom meeting with them, but sometimes it's difficult to tell how they, you know, I don't see something as simple as an attachment point. Like, is there double-sided tape behind that? Or did you use glue? And if you did, how do we do that next time, or do we not? And here's why. And so that's been difficult. I think sometimes the technical aspects are overlooked, but you realize teaching like this that you're really hands-on with them, and there are a lot of important things that need to be addressed before they move into the upper level courses. So that's been really difficult. I guess in C, one of the other questions, what's an example of something you're doing where you're working towards the same goals but in a different way? I mean, there was an analogy. So, you know, you're trying to land a plane, but in a different way you would usually do this. But I think one of the things that we can still focus on, and I don't know if I see this as a benefit, but we can still really focus on, I think something I drill into them in the courses, any studio course I teach, is concept and the ideation process, and really taking your time with the ideation process. Some people don't like sketchbooks, but I'm still kind of old school, I guess. But you know, are we spending time in the ideation process of this piece to really suss out what we're going to do? And we know we could argue that, hey, sometimes it's good to just jump in and make work, right? But I think at this stage, I'm using that a little more in this course. So they're uploading their sketches, 3 to 4 pages with paragraphs, and I would say that it's not more work because they usually do this in class, but I'm having them be more detailed and tell me a little bit more about how they came to this idea. Now, we can focus on making models, but that's a little more difficult, and some of them don't really seem to be into that at this point, and that's completely understandable. So we're still able to focus on concept and the ideation process and ideation phase of the projects. And I'm still able to sort of talk to them about why I'm making this work, So I think that sort of covers the questions posed in the email. I kind of jumped around a little bit there. Sorry for that. So feel free to chime in.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And I really appreciate that you sort of shared with us, you know, I'm trying to reach the same learning goals or concepts in a different way, because I do think that's just something we need to think about in this state that we're in right now. So why don't we hear a little bit from James, and then we'll kind of open this up to discussion. And remember, you can always put something in the chat.
Great, fantastic. Okay, thanks. You know, I am a professor in graphic design in the College of Design, and I'm teaching 2 sections of the same studio class this semester. And the class is called Color and Form in Surface Design. And actually, you know, the whole class is about making and using your hands and using materials and sort of thinking through materials, using materials and processes to also help as a vehicle for the generation of ideas as well, and sort of the refinement of concepts. So the idea of materials and concepts and process and design thinking are all sort of melded together in this studio class. And obviously, you know, the class is actually about surface design. So screen printing, dyeing. Also, there's a term project, which actually they're working on at the moment, which is very explicitly also about making and applying design to surfaces, and then making 2- and/or 3-dimensional objects as well that are designed artifacts, you know, that have that also are related to a design concept. So Yeah, I mean, I would just totally agree and have the same sort of experience as we've just heard from Jason. You know, I mean, the pros and cons and everything. I just to summarize, I mean, I think that the, you know, in terms of the easiest transitions, I think there's a pretty straightforward conversion of a large part. A straightforward conversion is possible for a large part of the course content. So for example, you know, our third project, which was the project that took place immediately after spring break, so we weren't able to be in the studio for this at all, was going to be a 4-color screen print color separation. So that's 4 screens. And so, you know, basically in this current situation where everyone's at home, they've been able to do pretty much the same project. Students have been able to do all the, you know, the sketching of ideas, brainstorming, getting feedback, improving their designs, and then even developing quite a lot of the technical aspects leading up to screen printing, you know, digitally creating 4-color separation, positives, making the 4 digital files that were made into positives for making the screens, producing digital mock-ups for the final screen print. But, you know, obviously the whole thing falls short of the last part of the project, which would be, you know, mixing the inks by hand, exposing the screens, you know, coating the screens, hand printing their screens in sequence on paper, you know, and all the sort of technical but hands-on aspects of that. So, you know, that sort of straightforward conversion, I think, you know, of most of the course content, you know, can take place fairly easily in this context. One thing that I've noticed as well, you know, in our Zoom meetings is, it seems to me that the students who are attending the Zoom classes seem to be very present, actually. There's a sense of concentration in the group that I wasn't expecting. So, you know, I think that's a positive little sort of aside there, you know, that in this sort of Zoom environment. So, you know, obviously the hard part of this is that the positive momentum of the studio is missing. And I'd like to, I've got some ideas about how that, how maybe one could achieve more of that sort of studio culture and environment in an online environment. But, you know, obviously it's been a steep learning curve the last six and a half weeks. And I don't feel as if that I've, you know, I mean, I think moving forward, I've got some ideas about that, but I'm not saying that I've achieved them, you know, in this semester. I've, you know, although students have said that they like the feedback review Zoom sessions that we've had, looking at work in progress, they've reported missing the energy of the physical space, people working all around, inspiring each other to try new things, catch a glimpse, you know, catching glimpses of this or that, you know, different ideas, even just ordinary casual conversation can be a part of the creative process. So that tends to be, that's quite difficult to replicate. It's also difficult to teach hand skills online to students who have little experience of this. On the other hand, for those who have got experience of you know, hand skills and a background in making, you know, this kind of environment, strangely, you know, it seems to be a great opportunity for exploration of craft skills and for individual students to take advantage of being able to spread out at home, which is often difficult in the studio, in the classroom. And you know, and again, you know, it's I think the online environment is potentially, you know, a great opportunity to develop resourcefulness and self-directedness. But again, you know, these are things that we put right at the heart, I think, of design curriculum, the idea of resourcefulness and self-directedness. And it's, you know, at the best of times, it's you know, that's a challenge to really communicate to students, the idea of really encouraging students to be self-directed and being resourceful. So when this, you know, when this all took place just after the end of spring break, the idea that we were suddenly going to be, you know, not in the classroom anymore, I actually felt quite excited about the concept of you know, using the home as a studio, you know, and actually encouraging students to think of the materials that they're surrounded by, you know, in their domestic lives as being potential design materials, you know, things, you know, cooking materials, things in the kitchen, things that they might find in the basement. If they're lucky, they might have a workshop or something like that. Anything that's lying around. So the spirit of the fourth project here has been very much about, it's a term project about making, where normally, you know, they would be able to sort of pull together what they'd learned throughout the semester and work and develop and hone their screen printing and dyeing skills and apply these to in interesting ways that tied in with their own individual sensibilities in the studio. In this case, you know, it's been very much more you know, being at home, the students have had to rely on what they've got around them much more. And but I've seen that as a very positive thing, because as I said before, you know, it ties in with our idea, you know, about you know, the need for resourcefulness for designers and for creative people. You know, that sort of that idea that you look around and, you know, what have you got in front of you? It's almost a metaphor for a bigger picture, I think, about the value of design thinking actually in our current world. And so, as I say, you know, this is something that I'm pretty enthusiastic about. But you know, I think the difficulty is you know, it's hard to reach the students who struggle with a lack, or perhaps a lack of experience in these two areas. First, maybe a lack of experience of using their hands as a natural part of their own sort of creative endeavors. And that could go back to high school and you know, how much of that they were exposed to then. And then the second thing is that idea of being resourceful and self-directed. It's hard to teach that, I think, in an online environment. So far, you know, I've found that that's part of the thing that I've been struggling with. So, you know, quickly talking about the same thing that, you know, that Jason was just talking about, working towards the same learning goals, but in a different way. So, you know, obviously there's the main sort of student learning outcome for this class is mastering a body of knowledge and a mode of inquiry. And, you know, I feel as if in so many ways that that student learning goal can equally be accounted for in this sort of online environment. Understanding, for instance, you know, well, I put in the student learning goal is, you know, is for students to learn to use visual language, primarily two-dimensional language of design elements, in order to communicate text-based ideas. The body of knowledge around this subject consists of understanding how best to engage a viewer with visual information, which is design, you know, design thinking. How best to integrate cultural understanding and experience into this knowledge, and how best to technically execute the visual component of this communication. So that part is about hand-eye mind knowledge and coordination. And obviously that's the part that's a little tricky. So looking for, you know, sort of thinking about the future, and, you know, and thinking about resources and tools. I mean, I would, it's a pity now, you know, we're at the end of the semester, because I think, you know, if I'd sort of had this thought right at the beginning, I would have really put a lot of effort into having each student create a home studio environment. So whatever that entails, you know, it would be a conscious part of the course content. So rather than thinking about this online environment as being some kind of virtual studio, it would actually be a real studio, that they would construct a studio, and this would be part, as I say, it would be part of the course content, and whatever that would mean. But some commonality would be important, and I think that could be supplied by having each student have a very simple studio kit, which we could put together. And in the case of screen printing, you know, that would be a really, really rudimentary screen printing kit, and some other materials as well that could be used at home to really achieve the same kinds of ideas to do with surface design. And then, so that I sort of imagine this idea where every person in the class, I say there were 20 people in the studio class, every person had a studio at home. It could be a corner of a room or just literally on a table, but it was their workspace and they had their materials there. And then also part of this would be to actually teach students how to film that space, so that when we were doing Zoom meetings and things like that, each student could be really talking within as if they were in their studio space. So I think, honestly, I think that for tactile classes, I think it's very important for students to be able to really feel that they are situated in some way within a creative environment. And I think that actually it sort of behooves us in a way to teach very explicitly then how to create that creative environment at home. I just wanted to just show you, just matter of interest very quickly, two of the two projects. I just want to just quickly share my screen actually. So obviously I don't have.
Mary needs to unshare her screen first.
Oh, okay.
There we go. Now you should be able to do it.
Yeah, I just wanted just to show you, just to quickly illustrate the idea that, obviously it's fairly straightforward to go through the whole sort of iterative process of working out an idea through sketching and so on. That can take place anywhere. And so that's no problem with that part of it. And here's just one example of a student working through some sketches and so on. And then building up to actually putting together this 4-color print idea. And then, this image here shows how they've also completely complied with one of the technical requirements of this assignment, which is also to break down each layer into its different color positives. So this is one of the layers of the design. And you can see in this, there's a key screen and then flat areas of color. Another design is, this is just it was a sort of a concept about being socially isolating on a bicycle. So you needed a sort of extremely long tandem. This was the poster project to do with sort of coronavirus sort of public information. And this student actually, just worked with lots of drawings and things like that. And then this is again, one of the technical things of just having one of the 4 colors separated out here. This is the magenta screen. And then the final print, you could call it a sort of a print in inverted commas. It would be fairly straightforward to execute this, but because he's made all the positives and everything like that. And then he also actually further developed the idea into, you can see in this, the halftone screen has been created. So you can easily do that digitally with, it's kind of like a simulation of what the halftone image would look like. So although, all of this, there's so much of the course content of this class is possible. And I think any tactile class, obviously, the part that's missing is this, is the feel of the materials and the smell and the sight of them, really. And so that's why I've come to this conclusion, that we need to create a kind of a real home studio environment, or at least we need to give students the wherewithal and the knowledge and the encouragement and guidance, as part of the class to actually create that environment for themselves. And actually, I think that there's something really positive about that. Because I think that as design students move forward, through their degrees and out into the world, it comes back to this idea about being resilient and really resourceful. That's super important for students to be successful. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, James. I see quite a bit of activity in the chat room. Is there anything we want to pull out of the chat room, Mary?
Anita, so I'll just say, so Neil can't make it after all, but I'll just do a very brief description of his course because I helped him.
Yeah, please.
And because this goes along with some of what James just said. Keep in mind that we had the luxury of 9 months to convert his face-to-face floral design class into an online class. So it was a very intentional process. So it was a floral design class. So we pre-recorded the lectures, but each week the students had to do a design. So some of the things that we did that relate to what has been said is the students were required to purchase a kit, or at least have all of the different, scissors and whatever it is, wire cutters, things that they would need to do the floral design. In the past, the students would go to the St. Paul campus, go to the lab, and it was very much a cookie cutter sort of thing. Neil would have his design, his model design, and then the students went and basically just replicated it. With the online, what the students did is they were required then to source their own flowers. So they could go to, the grocery store and pick up some flowers. So they had to follow the design theme. They had to do this, demonstrate the skills that he was covering that week. But what he found is that students were actually far more creative in this environment than they were in kind of the cookie cutter lab environment. So that was one of the very positive things that came out of that. In terms of how the students would show their designs, I think he used a combination of Flipgrid, of having students submit videos, pictures. I think a couple of times he had students vote on which design was the best of the week. If you're interested, I'd encourage you to learn more about his class. Please feel free to reach out to him. So Neil Anderson from Horticulture on the Twin Cities campus. But it just ended up, at the beginning we were like, how on earth are we ever going to change something that is so tactile into something virtual? And it ended up working out much better than we could have ever expected. So feel free to reach out to Neil. I'm sure he'd be happy to answer any questions. But then from the chat, I'll go to that. There's a lot of interest in this idea of creating a studio space. And as I just put in the chat, if any of you write up a description of like this home studio space that you'd be willing to share out with everyone else, please send that to us, because that would be something, and that seemed to generate a lot of interest. And I saw a lot of head nods as James was describing that. And that would be a wonderful thing to share out with the broader audience.
I also noticed in the chat that question that was raised by Jason, which is how do you deal with three-dimensionality? Does anyone want to respond to the question of dealing with three-dimensionality? I noticed this in the chat.
Oh, from Jim. Okay, Jim.
You had talked
yeah.
about mailing things, but
yeah.
That is a thorny issue.
Yeah, one of the things, I forgot to mention this earlier, but this touches on some of what James was saying, and Mary as well. But our fourth, and this doesn't have much to do with the studio that we kind of talked about here in the chat, but our fourth project, luckily, it was going to be a site-specific installation art piece. So, and we're talking about Andy Goldsworthy, and many other folks, but luckily we were able to sort of transition into you're all 95% of you are at home at your parents' houses at this point. Take a walk, find materials that you can work with in that location. Do a site-specific installation. Socially distance, walk, but stay away from busy places. And one of the things that's working, I'm getting in progress images, and it's working. I think Mary or James may have mentioned, James mentioned sort of using materials at hand, and they are really, really taking to this piece. And I'm not sure if it's because we're all, here in Minnesota, we're itching to get outside and do work at this point anyway. But they're all, I get a message from a student last night who at the beginning of the semester was kind of engaged, and she's sort of grown as the semester has gone on. But she messaged me last night. She said, "Jason, it's raining tomorrow, and I have an idea to use the rain in my piece." And I met with her this morning via Zoom, and she has this great idea. And I don't know if we would have been able to use water as an element in class. So that's kind of something that's working, and I'm not sure how. That's an easy way to source materials, right? They're working with grasses, sticks, found pods and things, but how do we continue to do that when, you know, when shipping becomes an issue, or getting these materials to the students become an issue? But yeah.
Sorry, I'm going to jump right in. I don't know if I'm supposed to or not, but that was my question.
Welcome to pop in.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Jim. I'm the Facilities and Technical Coordinator in the Twin Cities Department of Art and Regis Center. So we have a really large ceramics program. We've got a large sculpture program. And I agree with what everyone said. Home studio makes perfect sense. When all this stuff happened, what did we do? Some of our classes, we created kits and sent them to students. So in some areas of discipline, it's right on, but how do you deal with like a ceramics class, or how do you deal with a woodworking class? And more to the thing that I'm thinking about is, how do you give those, let's say, beginning level classes the technical skills so that they can move on to a higher division class? Is it possible to do that? There might be some way, and maybe if we were all thinking about this a year in advance, we could have worked that out. But because most of it's on the fly, I mean, I commend all the faculty for doing this, and technical staff for support that this all came down in such short notice. But those are the things that kind of concern me, because a number of our classes, the skill sets are really built on beginning level to intermediate to advanced. And how do you do that when it's physically and equipment and material driven? For ceramics, as I said, I don't mean to harp on that, but I was the technician in the ceramics area for a number of years, and it's like things are tied to kilns, things are tied to physical equipment to manipulate the clay. And in the case of ceramics, how do you ship 300 pounds of clay to a student? So there's a lot of different things in play. But again, as you stated, we look at it differently, and how can we do that? But those are just some of the things that I think about, and that physical skill set that may not be able to be taught that way, or maybe we can. Maybe it's just I'm not thinking creatively enough for it. But how can we work that so that those skills are taught to the students so that they can move on to upper division classes when everything goes back to normal, if whatever normal might be at that point in time?
Thank you so much for that. That is the challenge. That's one reason why these sessions were convened. I'm not sure if there's anything coming up in the chat about this, because some of this is the idea when you're talking about students learning technical skills. Some of it is them as an apprentice. And your apprentice model is to actually show and demonstrate, and then have them do it, and then you provide correction or guidance and that type of thing. And I don't know if there's ways to support that apprentice part of the technical work. Anyone want to chime in on that?
I'll say a little bit about some informal crafting sessions that I've been having with friends. So that's been a really good way to explore different software platforms, because we all get enough Zoom meetings during our work weeks. I'm Molly Sanford, by the way. I work in the College of Design in the fabrication department. But my friends and I have been using the app called Marco Polo. It's a video chatting app that's really easy to use, and it feels more like a live conversation, even though you don't have to be using it at the same time. So, and it works best on mobile devices. So that's been a really great way to show, you know, here's what I'm working on right now. What are your thoughts about it? And then it's fun to see my friends show what they're working on, and then I can give feedback on that and help them with ideas and stuff. So maybe that's something that could be worth exploring. It doesn't have to be sit down in front of a computer screen, because so much of what we do in making environments is moving around and showing 3 dimensions. So if you use your phone, you can more easily show sculpture or something like that.
Thank you, Molly. Oh, go ahead, Mary.
Yeah, I was going to say that I think relates to what Chris put in the chat, Chris Lopez, that she and Karen Hasselman feeling connected and a sense of community, that seems like that would be a way to also do that.
I also noticed Abby put something in the chat about using 3D modeling software. Do you want to say anything about that as an example?
Okay, well, my comment was from like architecture, interior design, and you know, perspective, because we have a lot of three-dimensional modeling software we use. You know, so after a student might have developed some of their sketching or come up with like their conceptual design, they begin to model them using software like Revit, which is a building information modeling software. And once they model it, you know, they're able to navigate through it, create walkthroughs and share it three-dimensionally. You know, so those are ways by which we can overcome some of those, you know, collaboration or be able to visualize what the student is working on. And the interesting thing about Autodesk, because of COVID-19, there is a platform that is called BIM 360. And BIM 360 is what practitioners use to collaborate and work on files simultaneously. So multiple people can be working in teams and working on the same drawing file. So they decided to let us have it for free till the end of May. So students who are working on projects, like design projects in teams, are able to collaborate, even with the professor as well. And then in Zoom, you know, when we have like studio sessions, you're able to also like mark up and give feedback. And, you know, like if, say, like in the design, the student doesn't have like enough like means of egress, you know, like the doors swings are in the wrong direction or something, you're able to just sketch and, you know, using the tool when you're sharing screen to just point out the areas in which they need to make some changes and correct that. I mean, a lot of this seem to, even when you're in the virtual world, it's still kind of two-dimensional to an extent, but you're still able to navigate it if it's like a digital model. The other interesting thing I wanted to say, which some of our faculty, you know, my colleagues and I have grappled with in interior design is, you know, like, and James pointed this out as well, craftsmanship or the craftsmanship skills, it's really hard to tell in a virtual world, because when you know, there's also another software, Photoshop can make like a really, you know, if the sketch, it could be enhanced to make it look nicer in Photoshop and things like that. I mean, sometimes that's an advantage for the students as well, but from the skills we're trying to judge, sometimes if we're trying to judge their hand sketching skills, if they've adapted or changed it in Photoshop, you know, I mean, it's like, I mean, you no longer could tell what's actually their hand sketching skill versus what's the digital, you know, transformations they've made to it. Yeah, thanks.
Exactly, yeah.
Thank you.
Can I add something?
Yes, please.
Yeah, I just want to go back to also what Jim was saying, you know, because I do think that's really something to struggle with here. You know, the idea of the sequencing of classes, you know, and building sort of, you know, beginner, mid-range, advanced skills in this more improvised environment. And I've been thinking a lot about how I feel as if this is also an opportunity for a lot more sort of curriculum integration, you know, within programs, and you know, to really have another look at our curriculum, curricula, and to look at really on a deep conceptual level how classes are interrelating with each other within and even across programs. I think it would be an opportunity to really look at that, actually. And I think that would be the answer to the question of how to have build skills, you know, within quite sort of specialized mediums and so on, because then it would be more about the ideas about underlying concepts to do with idea development and ideas like that were actually really emphasize. And again, it comes back to that thing about being resourceful then, and actually training and helping encourage people to be resourceful. I'll leave it at that because obviously I can go on for ages, so I'll just stop.
Thank you, James. Something that's coming up in the chat is that there is a limit to what can be taught online that's tactile. So glazing, ceramics, the kiln. And this is similar to a different session we had, which was on teaching music, movement, and theater. And so in the movement, music, and theater, the limitation was how do you work with an ensemble? Because even if you use the technology, there's always a lag and you can't get synchronicity. And you also can't really be aware about other bodies in space or music in space. And then even in theater, you can't really learn studio production of live theater without doing studio production in a live setting. So I do just want to acknowledge that there is a kind of limitation in the virtual space. And so some of these comments that are coming up, I just really want to acknowledge that. And we've had that come up in other contexts. And that kind of gets to one of the questions that we kind of posed to the general forum, which is what do you need to teach online? Some of you will be teaching online in the summer. Some of you may find that you need to teach online in the fall. We don't know what's going to happen in fall. Of course, it may be that we start out in person in fall and have to shift again. I mean, so the question is, what can we do with that limitation? Okay, because it is a limitation. Is that something that we have to let go of for now? Or is that just something that we have to sort of put into the curriculum later when we feel we can be in place together? I'm not really sure, but I do want to acknowledge that huge, huge barrier.
Yeah, sorry, can I just jump in there again? I mean, you know, the risk of sounding super Pollyanna-ish about this, and I totally agree. You know, this is a limitation. There's so many limitations, but again, you know, we're talking, since this is a program about tactility and creativity and the relationship, obviously, between the tactile world and then our whole response to being expressive and creative and teaching that body of knowledge. There is something about the value of limitation, you know, that when you're sort of in a tight little box, you know, and you're constrained, you know, you do have to, well, there's a whole tradition in art and design of deliberately embracing limitation. And I feel in there's a lot that one can explore in terms of possibility. But at the same time, you know, it is not going to be possible, I don't think, to have any of these studio classes actually take place online for the rest of time, you know, and to suddenly move away from the studio environment. The studio is super important and it's fundamental. But, you know, the idea of limitation, perhaps, yeah, maybe there are things there which temporarily can become real positives, you know, just temporarily, but not in the long term, perhaps.
I mean, I'm thinking about, and this is maybe perhaps a crazy brainstorm, but in thinking about ceramics, would it be possible to organize some sort of like pickup of clay projects that then get fired, and then the instructor does a display of the final project and the students get to see their work fired, you know, working with some of community outlets as well, like the Northern Clay, you know, to help facilitate pickup, drop off, you know, so eventually, you know, there is a way to let the students see their 3D object come to life. in some sort of organized fashion, you know, and I think using ceramics is just one example, but I think there's ways to possibly facilitate that in other studio environments as well.
Yeah, I mean, I could see the potential for, you know, on that note, like I talked earlier about the bronze and aluminum casting, you know, I could see that happening again in the fall if needed. But I've also been thinking about some things we usually teach 3D modeling, 3D printing early on in materials and space, 3D foundations. And I could see something like that maybe working in the fall where they're, you know, they're designing remotely with the software that I'm trying to teach them, you know, online, right? And then they're sending files, and we're either 3D printing or somehow casting the work for them, and it gets back to them. Also thought about maybe sort of a group project with a laser cutter where they're sending files, and I mean, we still sort of have access to the building at this point, kind of. I mean, I'm not sure what will happen in the fall, but as long as we have access to the machines to make this happen, I could see it maybe working, but like James said, they're still missing out on the, you know, on the studio experience, but it's a start.
Well, a provocative question that came up in a different session was, why would a student continue to take virtual studio courses with us? Like, what could we say to them? Certainly, we could say the things that James has expressed about dealing with limitations and working like a designer. But that was, you know, a really compelling question. What do we say to students?
Yeah. Yeah.
I think, yeah, one thing would be to emphasize also the importance of contact, you know, and I think, was it Molly who mentioned the Marco Polo app, you know, that increasingly, you know, we should definitely find ways to engender a feeling of contact between all the participants that's amplified as much as possible.
And I guess on the other, you know, I've been thinking about this. Do we, for those of us who sort of, I mean, some of you teach completely digital, or you teach a lot of software, but say we have a mix, and I think James said he kind of has a mix, hands-on and some software. But you know, do we, if we're thinking about how we teach in the fall, do we say, okay, usually it's sort of a mix. We're doing 60-40. Do we sort of front end? Do we do a lot of that digital, or do we sort of plan for a lot of that digital work to be done on the front end in the fall? And just say, okay, we are missing out on the hands-on, but this digital experience that you will get will be an experience that we've had, you know, 3-4 months, not 2 days to plan, right? And I've been thinking about that. How do we, you know, is it sort of a full-on digital focus in the early part of the semester? I don't know, but.
Chris Lopez, I don't know if we have more than one Chris here. We only have a few minutes left, but could you talk briefly about what you mentioned in the chat about creating community? Because I think that relates a bit back to this whole idea of the studio experience.
Yes, so my colleague Karen and I mean, we've been talking about this because for the art department, I mean, community is so important, and it happens in a lot of different spaces. And in the arts quarter in general, I love walking through Regis or in the basement of Rarig and just seeing students gathered around. So I think Karen has some wonderful ideas, you know, like on the individual level for creating community and working with students. And I mean, especially since this is such a weird time. They're they're isolated, everyone's isolated. You know, there's just a lot of stuff going on in the world. I would say my quick advice is in addition to looking for ways to students to connect, I mean, like through apps like Marco Polo or in online discussions, is first of all to make sure to explicitly create spaces for them because they might not always realize that they're allowed to do this. So, I mean, just give them permission, tell them this is a good thing over and over again. And also creating community, you do this unintentionally in your classes, I mean, or out of practice, you know, share experience in teaching in a face-to-face environment. So if you're teaching online, the key is to think about how to scaffold this for your students. And that can start off with icebreakers in the beginning of a course to help them get to know each other, pairing them up to think through their projects, or, you know, to work on smaller activities so that they can, you know, and kind of rotating through the class so that they can get to know each other. And then gradually over the course of a few weeks, getting them to work in groups, you know, just start small and then help them keep interacting throughout their courses. And I can pass along a couple of resources that I like. One is a book, it's about the phases of engagement in a classroom. And I would say, I mean, it's kind of light on theory. It's very readable though. I mean, and it has lots of good tips for specific activities that you can do. So that's my general advice. And Karen, do you want to talk about some of the cool things that you've been doing or thinking about?
Sure, and I'll be brief. Yeah, I work with a group of students that we bring together regularly on Fridays, and they're art students, and then I quiz them about, you know, how is it going with your online classes, what's working, what's not. And I get strong feedback, and what's been really strong is exactly what Chris mentioned, is they still have connections that they made at the beginning of the semester with students, and they're still engaging with them. So if they worked in a group in the beginning of the semester, they're still texting those students, having an ongoing relationship, and that makes them feel like part of the class. The other thing I received is information from them is they really like to see other students in class, and to, you know, so if it's a Zoom meeting, they weren't as thrilled about the recorded ones because they wanted to ask questions to the instructor. They also wanted to talk to the other students. And they really appreciated the breakout sessions where they could have moments to talk to the other students about their projects. And Chris also recommended something about the icebreakers is, you know, the possibility is at the beginning of a Zoom meeting is just to have, you know, the same 3 or 4 students meet together to discuss what they're working on and what's going on. So they have this continued connection with other students, and it isn't just them sitting in a group with 25 other people staring at a screen. It just makes them feel more engaged, where they're invested in the class. So we found that to be helpful.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing that. You know, it's 11:31, so I'm wondering, Mary, if you could show that last closing slide so we can just remind people of what's next. So thank you so much for all of your ideas and your questions. We may find that we do these sessions again, that this is kind of an iteration. But you will be receiving a survey to give, just 3-question survey to give a little bit of feedback on this session. Or if you choose, you could go to this Z link, zumn.edu virtual2. If you'd like to contact me directly, this is my email address, gonza035, but also you're welcome to contact CEI. So we will send also a follow-up email to all of the participants in this session so that you have the compiled resources, access to the recording, but all of those things will also be posted to our CEI website. So I just want to say thank you, everyone, for joining us today, and even staying 2 more precious minutes. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.